Homeless veteran on trial leaves everyone speechless in court. They say a single moment can change the course of a lifetime. In a crowded courtroom in downtown Philadelphia, the city's residents press shoulder to shoulder, waiting to see if that saying holds true. Reporters scribble notes while cameras flash in the corridor. On trial stands James J. Delaney, a once proud Army combat medic who served with distinction in Afghanistan. Now homeless and in ragged clothes, he faces charges that have turned half the city against him, and the other half uncertain about what to believe. No one can quite fathom how a hero fell so far, but today, secrets will be revealed that leave everyone speechless. James J. Delaney had never imagined his life would lead him to a cold holding cell in the heart of Philadelphia. He had always been known for his unwavering loyalty, both on and off the battlefield. But on a frigid January night, the police found him huddled in a corner near a Walmart store on Roosevelt Boulevard. Clutched in his trembling hands was an expensive leather jacket price tag still attached. The local news channels were quick to dub it an obvious theft, painting him as just another homeless troublemaker. The public, swayed by sensational headlines, immediately tagged him as a criminal. But those who looked closer realized there was far more to the story. For years, Jay had drifted around the city, living in shelters or on the streets whenever shelter beds filled up. He had served in Afghanistan as a combat medic, saving countless lives under fire. Upon returning stateside, he struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. A lack of steady work and the weight of his hidden emotional scars eventually pushed him toward homelessness. When the police arrived that night, they assumed he was just another petty thief. They never paused to see that the jacket he held was neatly folded or that he stood near a donation box set up by a local non-profit. Witness statements differed. Some swore he was stealing from the store, while others insisted he was rummaging through the donation box. Those contradictions sparked the initial intrigue. Why would a homeless vet with no history of shoplifting suddenly risk everything for a jacket worth maybe $100? The district attorney, Margaret Valenti, a political up-and-comer with a tough-on-crime persona, saw this as an opportunity to flex her prosecutorial muscles. She wasted no time in filing charges, citing evidence that seemed stacked against him. Local media outlets seized on the story, highlighting Jay's photograph in uniform next to his mugshot, stirring public debate about how America treats its veterans. But despite the heated discussions, the overarching view was that Jay had committed a crime. End of story. From the moment Jay sat in that holding cell, he was bombarded by memories of his time in Afghanistan, the blasts echoing across dusty compounds, the frantic voices on the radio calling for a medic, and the countless nights he lay awake, wondering if mortar fire would end it all. When he finally returned home, the quiet was almost too much to bear. Every slammed car door or flickering streetlight reminded him of those nights in Kandahar. Those invisible wounds weighed on him. Unemployable and struggling to adapt, he fell between the cracks of a system that too often forgets its heroes. He tried everything to regain his footing, applying for roles at local businesses, seeking therapy through the Veterans Affairs Hospital, and attending job fairs. He'd even attended a Walmart hiring event once, but it seemed every time he was close to a breakthrough, the shadows of war pulled him back. He'd find reasons to self-sabotage or experience sudden panic attacks that made consistent employment impossible. Rather than judge him, many who knew him at the local shelter admired his resilience. He spoke kindly to new arrivals, directing them to resources he'd gleaned from his own experiences. Whenever staff needed a volunteer to unload boxes or paint walls, Jay stepped up. The staff had once joked, if dedication were currency, Jay would be the wealthiest man in town. Yet wealth was nowhere in sight, and so he remained homeless. The night of the arrest, he had been drawn to the Walmart parking lot after hearing that a local non-profit Hope for Heroes had set up a clothing drive there. While rummaging through the donation box for something to keep him warm, he found the leather jacket, not fully aware of its origin. At least, that was his version of events. Unbeknownst to him, the store manager had called the police, suspecting shoplifting. By the time officers arrived, confusion reigned. He was found outside, near the donation box, but also near the store's back entrance. One officer noticed the store's security tags still on the jacket. As far as the cops were concerned, that was enough to slap on the handcuffs. Courtroom 7A in the Philadelphia Municipal Courthouse buzzed with tension. Rows of old wooden benches faced the elevated judge's bench, where Judge Lillian Brewster presided. She was an older woman, known both for her strict adherence to law and for her charitable inclinations toward veterans. She had lost a nephew in Iraq, and that personal connection often made her sympathetic to those who had served. Yet, she was also known to crack down on anyone she perceived as gaming the system. No one could predict her stance as Jay was led in, wrists bound in handcuffs, his gaze a mixture of humiliation and quiet determination. Local station CBS 3 had a reporter present, as did the Philadelphia Inquirer. This was bigger than a typical petty theft case. The presence of the press made it impossible to treat the proceedings lightly. As Jay's public defender, Robert "Rob" Marshall, approached the defense table, he was acutely aware of the daunting task ahead. Rob had only a week's worth of official discovery materials. Eyewitness accounts were contradictory. The security footage was inconclusive, and the store had corporate policies about releasing certain angles from their cameras. Walmart's regional office, referencing an ongoing investigation, withheld the full video. Despite the complexities, the prosecution seemed confident in its open and shut narrative. The district attorney, Margaret Valenti, sat poised, stacks of documents lined up in front of her. In the weeks since Jay's arrest, she had faced criticism for going after a homeless veteran so aggressively. But Margaret had her eyes on bigger aspirations, possibly a congressional seat. Being tough on crime, no matter how small, was part of her political brand. She believed that if she gave Jay a pass, it would signal weakness. The tension was palpable as the judge cleared her throat, commanding the room's attention with a single gesture. Proceedings were about to begin. Margaret Valenti strode to the center of the courtroom with the confidence of someone who had delivered countless opening statements. She painted a picture of a man who, under the cover of night, had trespassed onto Walmart property, intending to steal. "This jacket," she intoned, lifting a clear plastic evidence bag that contained the expensive leather coat, was found in the defendant's hands. He offers no receipt, no explanation that stands up to scrutiny. She referenced store employee statements describing a loitering figure near the loading dock earlier that evening. She read from a police report that indicated Jay was non-compliant when officers arrived, carefully omitting that he was disoriented and had trouble understanding their commands. She acknowledged his veteran status only briefly, almost dismissively, insisting that many veterans reintegrate successfully, so it was no excuse for criminal behavior. Her tone was firm, unwavering. Jay watched quietly, his eyes flickering with suppressed emotion. Everyone in the gallery leaned forward, searching for any sign of remorse or guilt in him. But Jay's face was stoic, reminiscent of how he'd look when administering first aid in a combat zone, focused, unflinching, but battered by internal storms. Margaret concluded her statement by promising the jury that the evidence would clearly show Jay's guilt. The jacket with intact tags, the partial footage from the store's camera, and the testimony of the store manager who swore that the jacket had been on a display rack just hours earlier. She called it a case of theft, plain and simple, though her tone implied it was also morally reprehensible, as if this homeless veteran had betrayed not only the law, but the community that once respected him. When Rob Marshall approached the podium, he knew he needed to capture the jury's hearts just as much as their minds. He started by recognizing the complexities, admitting that yes, the jacket was found in Jay's hands. But, Rob insisted, the story was incomplete. He spoke of Jay's service record, honorable discharge, exemplary performance as a combat medic, multiple commendations including a Bronze Star for saving fellow soldiers in the line of fire. He was once your neighbor, your protector, Rob told the jury. Now he stands before you, a man worn down by life's harshest realities. Does this man look like a cunning thief or a person desperate for shelter from the bitter winter? He then pointed to the contradictory statements. Some witnesses saw Jay near the donation bin from Hope for Heroes, rummaging through clothing. Could the jacket have been a donated item rather than store property? He questioned why Walmart's corporate office had refused to release full surveillance. If they have nothing to hide, why not be transparent, he probed. The question hung in the air, planting a seed of doubt in at least some jury members' minds. Lastly, Rob reminded everyone that reasonable doubt was the standard. We are not here to brand a homeless veteran as a menace to society based on half-truths. We are here to discover the truth. With those words, Rob's voice wavered slightly with genuine emotion. Jay's eyes brimmed, but he blinked back any sign of tears. He was deeply grateful for his lawyer's passionate defense, even as he felt the weight of the entire city pressing down on him. During a brief recess on the second day of the trial, Jay sat alone at the defense table, fiddling with his hands, when a familiar figure approached from the gallery. "Jay, it's been a long time," said a calm but raspy voice. Jay looked up to see the face of Anthony "Tony" Brooks, a fellow soldier from their deployment in Afghanistan. Tony was a tall man, lean, with graying hair at the temples. The lines on his face spoke of years of worry and heartbreak. Jay immediately recognized his old friend, and they embraced an awkward, heartfelt hug that momentarily replaced the clatter of the courtroom with echoes of a shared past. Tony explained that he only recently heard about Jay's arrest through an old army buddy who saw the news. He had driven up from Virginia to support Jay. "I always owed you one," Tony said, recalling a night in Afghanistan when Jay's quick medical intervention saved his leg and possibly his life after a piece of shrapnel tore through their Humvee. "If you need someone to testify about your character, I'm here," Tony offered. Jay's eyes brimmed with gratitude. Rob Marshall, overhearing the exchange, quickly introduced himself to Tony and whisked him away to discuss how Tony's testimony could influence the jury. It was a critical moment for the defense. Having someone who could speak directly to Jay's moral character might sway those who viewed homeless veterans through a lens of stigma. Meanwhile, across the aisle, the prosecution cast suspicious glances. Margaret Valenti could sense the emotional weight that Tony's testimony would carry. She discreetly directed her paralegal to investigate Tony's background, looking for anything that could undermine his credibility. The battle lines were being drawn, and an old friend's arrival had just shifted the balance. On the third day, Rob filed a motion to compel Walmart to release the entire surveillance recording from the night of Jay's arrest. "We believe the partial footage provided is deliberately incomplete," he argued. The judge, seeing the possible importance of the evidence, granted the motion. A Walmart corporate representative, flustered and obviously displeased, was forced to present the full hours of security footage. What emerged was surprising, and not just for the defense. The new angles revealed Jay entering the parking lot from the side, nowhere near the store's main entrance or the clothing section inside. Instead, he was filmed walking directly to where the donation bin had been set up. Moreover, A short snippet showed a store employee rolling a cart of unsold or returned merchandise toward the same general area earlier that evening. The timestamp indicated it was around the same time Jay said he found the jacket. The company's policy for dealing with returned or slightly damaged items sometimes involved donating them to local charities. That new snippet could drastically reshape the narrative. If the jacket had been part of the cart, it might have been intended for donation, not for sale. Walmart's representative stammered that their internal logs did not show such a donation that evening, but the footage was damning. The store's manager appeared to be either misinformed or perhaps even lying about the jacket's location. Judge Brewster, with her keen eye, demanded an explanation. In a tense exchange, Walmart's representative insisted there must have been some mix-up. They tried to shift blame onto the local staff, but the damage was done. Any certainty about Jay's guilt was now shrouded in new doubts. The jury watched intently, and a ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. This was a major twist that changed the trajectory of the trial. On the fourth day, Tony Brooks took the witness stand. Rob started by gently guiding him through his background, his service in the army, his role in Afghanistan, and his relationship with Jay. Tony described in vivid detail the night Jay saved his life under mortar fire. "We were pinned down," he recounted. "I'd been hit in the leg. I screamed for help, thinking I was a goner. Jay ran right through the open courtyard. Bullets whizzed by, mortars exploded. He didn't hesitate. He patched me up, stabilized me, and dragged me out of there. I owe him everything." Rob then asked about Jay's moral character outside of combat. Tony spoke about how Jay would share his care packages with local children, how he volunteered for medical duties at clinics near their base, and how he wrote letters home for soldiers who struggled with literacy. He gave so much of himself, Tony said, his voice thick with emotion, and never asked for anything in return. Margaret Valenti tried to cross-examine Tony, suggesting that being a war hero doesn't rule out the possibility of committing theft. She pressed him, asking if Tony was aware of Jay's psychological struggles, if he ever witnessed Jay act irrationally or violently. Tony stood firm, stating he only saw Jay struggle internally and never harm anyone or exhibit dishonest behavior. Margaret's attempts to paint Jay as dangerously unstable fell flat. It was clear Tony was not only sincere, but deeply committed to honoring the truth. As Tony stepped down from the stand, there was a collective sense in the courtroom that the momentum had shifted. Just when it seemed the defense was gaining the upper hand, the prosecution called an unexpected witness, Linda Kowalski, a Walmart shift manager who had not been listed in the original documents. Linda was a petite woman in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back tightly. She took the stand somewhat nervously, glancing at Jay before directing her gaze to the district attorney. Linda testified that she saw Jay lurking near the store's rear entrance hours before the alleged theft. She claimed she overheard him talking to another homeless individual about grabbing something valuable and then leaving quickly. Rob immediately objected, arguing that this testimony was both new and suspiciously timed. Where had Linda been during the initial investigation? Why hadn't her statement appeared in the earlier police reports? Linda explained that she was afraid of losing her job if she spoke up against corporate policy. It sounded rehearsed, yet her testimony could undermine the defense's newly bolstered argument. A hush fell over the courtroom as she detailed a conversation she supposedly overheard. Words like easy pickings and leather jacket lingered in the air. When Rob cross-examined her, he revealed that Linda was recently passed over for a promotion, and her direct superior was the same store manager who had strongly supported the theft narrative. Additionally, the revelation that Linda's financial situation was precarious, she was behind on rent, raised the possibility that she might be susceptible to pressure. Still, Linda's statement put a dent in the defense's gains. The jury appeared puzzled, caught between conflicting versions of events. With Linda Kowalski's testimony looming large, Rob and his small defense team worked around the clock to dig into her background. A private investigator, funded by a local veterans advocacy group, discovered that Linda had received a sizable bonus from Walmart just 3 days earlier, a bonus that was uncharacteristically large for her position. Suspicious, the investigator interviewed co-workers who claimed Linda rarely worked in the back area, so hearing any conversation there would be unusual. Meanwhile, Jay sat quietly in his holding cell each night, wrestling with demons of war and the dread that he could be facing real prison time. He remembered vividly the confusion when he found the leather jacket near the donation bins. He had genuinely believed it was a donated item, especially since it was placed next to other garments in a box. Now, facing Linda's testimony, he felt the tendrils of despair creeping in. Had his life's trajectory, once filled with honor and duty, led only to this moment of public condemnation? But help came from an unexpected source. An off-duty Walmart employee who had worked the donation drive that evening recognized Jay's face on the news. She contacted the defense team, claiming she'd actually seen Jay walk toward the donation boxes and rummage through them. She wasn't certain about the jacket specifically, but her testimony could confirm that he was near the charity station, not inside the store. Rob immediately subpoenaed her for testimony, hoping she'd be the missing puzzle piece to disprove Linda Kowalski's claims. By the 6th day, the public's interest in the trial skyrocketed. Veterans groups rallied outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Support those who served and innocent until proven guilty." Others, disillusioned with what they perceived as leniency toward criminals, insisted that if Jay was guilty, he should be held accountable like anyone else. The social climate was tense, mirroring the friction inside the courtroom. Judge Brewster worked diligently to maintain order. She allowed extra security in the gallery, worried that the conflicting protesters might disrupt the proceedings. The atmosphere was charged with strong emotions. Jay's stoic demeanor made it hard to read his thoughts, but Rob could tell his client was on edge. One wrong twist could seal his fate. During a lunch break, Margaret Valenti approached Rob with a settlement offer. She hinted at a reduced sentence, possibly just probation, if Jay pleaded guilty to misdemeanor theft. Rob bristled at the suggestion. He knew Jay was innocent, and the new evidence about donations had yet to be fully laid out in court. "This isn't about winning or losing," Margaret pressed. "It's about ensuring justice is served." Rob nearly laughed at the irony. He politely declined, vowing to fight for a full acquittal. Margaret walked away, her lips pressed thin in frustration. She had hoped to wrap up the case before it morphed into a larger story that might damage her public image. The defense's new witness, the off-duty Walmart employee named Samantha Caldwell, took the stand next. A single mother in her early 30s, Samantha appeared earnest and slightly nervous. She admitted she wasn't supposed to be on the premises that night. She was simply volunteering at the donation drive after her shift ended. She recalled seeing Jay approach the donation bin, rummage through it, and pull out a leather jacket. "I didn't see him come from inside the store," she affirmed. "He was outside the entire time, at least from where I stood." Margaret Valenti attempted to discredit Samantha, pointing out that Samantha had not come forward immediately. Samantha explained she had left for the night right after and hadn't learned of Jay's arrest until later. She believed the jacket was part of the donations because it was placed among other items. Margaret pressed harder. "Could you have confused him with another individual? It was dark and there were multiple homeless people around." Samantha remained calm, stating she knew Jay's face from local community events. His distinctive features were hard to forget. This testimony helped restore some equilibrium. The jury seemed to lean forward, clearly intrigued. Was this entire ordeal a matter of corporate confusion, an innocent man caught in the crossfire of a big retailer's strict policies and an ambitious prosecutor's agenda? Or was it just a convenient story constructed by the defense to earn sympathy? During an afternoon recess, tension spilled over. Linda Kowalski was overheard arguing in the hallway with the same Walmart corporate representative who had withheld footage earlier. One of Rob's paralegals discreetly recorded snippets of their heated exchange. Linda seemed agitated, asking if she would still get her promotion. The corporate rep hissed something about keeping your story straight and not messing this up. Though the audio was muffled and incomplete, it hinted that Linda's testimony may have been coerced or bought. Rob immediately moved to have Linda's testimony impeached, presenting the recorded conversation to the judge. Margaret Valenti objected vehemently, questioning the legality of the recording. But after a brief private hearing, Judge Brewster allowed Rob to play a portion for the jury, ruling that there was reasonable suspicion of witness tampering. As the audio crackled through the courtroom speakers, Linda's face paled. She stammered excuses, claiming the conversation was about something else, a scheduling misunderstanding, a corporate policy update. Her words rang hollow. The jury looked on, some with brows furrowed, others exchanging knowing glances. A wave of unease spread through the prosecution's side. Margaret tried to distance herself from Walmart's corporate entanglements, insisting that the state had not coerced Linda. It was a short but powerful moment that cast significant doubt on Linda's credibility. If Linda's testimony fell apart, so did a large chunk of the prosecution's narrative about premeditated theft. The trial wasn't just about whether Jay stole a jacket. It also revealed the broader tragedy of veterans grappling with post-war life. On the seventh day, Rob brought in Dr. Karen Abelman, a psychologist specializing in veterans' mental health. She had been treating Jay sporadically at the Philadelphia VA hospital. Dr. Abelman explained the symptoms of Jay's PTSD, hypervigilance, nightmares, sudden panic attacks. She painted a picture of a man wounded, not in body, but in spirit. When you see him on the street, he might appear aloof or detached, she said, but inside, he's still fighting battles that ended for everyone else years ago. Margaret didn't dare impugn the legitimacy of PTSD, but she attempted to pivot, arguing that mental health issues do not exonerate criminal actions. Dr. Abelman agreed, yet insisted that Jay's condition would make it unlikely for him to plan a theft. He's reactive rather than proactive. His primary concerns are survival and avoiding triggers. Carefully orchestrating a theft is counterintuitive to his mindset, especially over a single clothing item that could be found in a donation bin anyway. The doctor's testimony brought some members of the jury to tears. A few of them had veterans in their families or knew someone who had served. The human angle became impossible to ignore. Even people who initially believed Jay was guilty were beginning to question their assumptions. Throughout the 8th day of the trial, it became increasingly apparent that the prosecution's case was weakening. Each piece of evidence that Margaret had presented was either neutralized or cast into doubt by the defense. The biggest blow came when Judge Brewster announced she was considering dismissing certain parts of the testimony as inadmissible due to questions of reliability. Margaret responded by doubling down. She made a dramatic statement suggesting that Jay had a history of confrontations with store security in the past. However, when pressed, she could only cite minor incidents like being asked to move along from loitering near a property line. None involved theft. Her approach seemed more like fear-mongering than factual argument, the jury noticed, and so did the public. News outlets began questioning whether the state was persecuting a homeless veteran for political gains. The backlash grew, and Margaret's political future started to look less certain. On the 9th day, something extraordinary happened. A local philanthropic group, Wounded Warriors of Philadelphia decided to post bail for Jay, enabling him to attend court sessions without shackles. Walking into the courtroom with a neat suit donated by the charity, Jay looked almost like his old self. His posture straighter, his face clear of the weariness that jail had imposed. The shift in optics was undeniable. The jury saw not just a homeless defendant, but a man with dignity and supporters who believed in his innocence. Judge Brewster allowed closing arguments to be scheduled for the following day, sensing that both sides had run out of meaningful new evidence. The legal chessboard was set for the final moves. That evening, news vans crowded outside the courthouse. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #JusticeForJay and #SupportOurVeterans. The city braced for whatever the verdict would bring. On the 10th day, Rob Marshall stood before the jury for his closing argument. He spoke not just as a defense attorney, but as a citizen grateful for the freedoms that veterans like Jay had fought to protect. He highlighted the inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, the suspicious timing of Linda Kowalski's testimony, and the newly revealed security footage that supported Jay's version of events. Rob also emphasized that Jay's character, shaped by years of service, was fundamentally incompatible with the notion of petty theft. He stood on the battlefield under constant threat of death and chose to serve his country. This is not a man who then slinks into the night to steal a jacket. It just doesn't add up. With the sincerity of someone who believed every word he spoke, Rob urged the jury to see that sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. Jay found the jacket among donated items, took it because he was cold, and never intended to break the law. Rob concluded by reminding them that a guilty verdict would not only condemn Jay, but also send a message about how society treats those who sacrificed for it. "We must not criminalize misfortune," he said. "We must champion justice." Margaret Valenti approached the jury for her final statement with a steeled expression. She reiterated that no one was above the law, not even a veteran. She argued that Walmart had no reason to donate a brand new leather jacket with tags still attached, that the alleged cart of returns was still an unverified rumor, and that Linda Kowalski's testimony, despite the troubling hallway argument, aligned with the initial police reports. She insisted the incomplete footage was a technical glitch rather than a cover-up. She tried to tug at the jury's sense of fairness. If you acquit Mr. Delaney simply because you feel sympathy for his situation, what precedent does that set? She appealed to logic, stating that the jacket belonged to the store. Rules exist for a reason. Veterans, civilians, no one should be exempt from accountability. Yet as she spoke, her voice seemed to strain. She sensed the jury's skepticism. The seeds of doubt had been firmly planted. Even some of her once powerful arguments now felt hollow in the face of contradictory evidence and witness tampering allegations. By the time she returned to her seat, it was clear that the emotional weight of the defense had overshadowed the prosecution's more clinical approach. The jury deliberated for hours, leaving the courtroom in a tense hush. Jay sat with Rob and Tony, occasionally exchanging quiet words. Outside, supporters gathered, many holding signs demanding justice or chanting encouragement. It felt like the entire city waited on pins and needles for the outcome. Finally, late in the afternoon, the bailiff summoned everyone back. Judge Brewster took her seat, and the jury filed in, faces solemn. The foreman, an older gentleman who had listened carefully throughout the trial, stood with a slip of paper in hand. "We, the jury, find the defendant, James Delaney, not guilty." Cheers erupted from the gallery. Tears of relief streamed down Jay's face. Rob embraced him. Tony patted his shoulder, repeating, "I knew they'd see the truth." Margaret Valenti's face tightened, her political aspirations taking a blow. She stood still for a moment, then gathered her papers. It was over. The judge thanked the jury for their service and dismissed the case, but not before chastising Walmart for its lack of transparency and hinting that Linda Kowalski's conduct might warrant future investigation. After the verdict, reporters bombarded Jay outside the courthouse steps. Microphones jostled for space and cameras flashed. Jay, overwhelmed, managed only a few words. "Thank you for believing in me." Rob stepped in, praising the justice system for ultimately doing its job. Tony stood by silently, arms folded protectively near Jay, ready to intervene if the crowd got too aggressive. Amid the chaos, a representative from Hope for Heroes approached Jay with tears in her eyes, offering him a temporary place to stay and job search assistance. Another philanthropic group suggested they could help with his ongoing therapy for PTSD. In that moment, Jay's story transformed from one of despair to one of hope. The city that had once assumed his guilt now rallied to lift him up. For the first time in years, Jay felt a flicker of optimism. But karma had other business to settle. Within weeks, the local press uncovered a scandal involving Walmart's regional management. They had a quiet policy of discarding returned items to cut losses in a way that sidestepped certain donation regulations, and they often manipulated store records to hide these practices. Linda Kowalski's name surfaced repeatedly in emails, showing she'd been coached to lie. The backlash was swift. Walmart faced public outrage, and Linda, who had hoped for a promotion, was summarily fired. Ironically, the very tactics she used to secure her future cost her everything. Margaret Valenti's reputation also suffered. Investigative reporters revealed that she had known about the incomplete footage much earlier, but proceeded with the case, hoping it would bolster her tough-on-crime image. The public felt betrayed, especially veterans groups who had once voted for her. Calls for her resignation flooded her office. She didn't resign, but her political ambitions likely ended. In the next election cycle, she lost in the primaries to a newcomer who campaigned on a platform of criminal justice reform. Jay's life gradually improved after the trial. The promise of therapy and stable housing turned into reality. With Tony's help, Jay found a modest studio apartment near the VA hospital, making it easier to attend regular counseling sessions. The noise of the city still rattled him sometimes, but having 4 walls and a bed to call his own was a huge step forward. He also began volunteering at Hope for Heroes, the very organization that had set up the donation drive where he was arrested. Working alongside other veterans, he helped organize clothing donations and assisted in job training workshops. Ironically, the same environment where he had been falsely accused of theft now became a place of healing and purpose. Word spread among Jay's old military comrades that he was back on his feet. He reconnected with a few buddies, sharing war stories and forging a new support system. His newfound stable address allowed him to qualify for certain veteran benefits he'd missed out on while homeless. A small but consistent disability pension alleviated some financial pressures. For the first time, Jay could afford groceries, a phone, and the occasional treat, a cup of coffee from Starbucks to start the day right. His PTSD didn't vanish, but with consistent therapy and medication, he learned to cope better. Whenever nightmares surfaced, Tony was just a call away. Sometimes they'd meet up for a late-night burger and talk it out. Other nights, Jay found solace in writing in a journal, a practice encouraged by Dr. Abelman. Through those pages, he discovered a semblance of peace, rewriting the narrative of his life. Before the trial, Jay had felt his days of service were over, but an opportunity arose when a local high school invited him to speak on Veterans Day. Nervous yet determined, Jay stood before a group of teenagers, many of whom knew nothing about war beyond what they saw in movies. He spoke not about heroics or medals, but about sacrifice, friendship, and the challenges veterans face upon returning home. He recounted the trial briefly, explaining how easy it is for the public to misjudge someone without understanding their journey. To Jay's surprise, the students were enthralled, asking questions about his experiences and how they could help veterans in their community. It was a moment of triumph, a sign that his story, once a symbol of injustice, could become a lesson in compassion and resilience. After the speech, the principal offered him a small stipend to consult on a civic engagement project. Jay accepted, eager to continue making a positive impact. Months passed, and the memory of the trial began to fade from the headlines. Yet, for those who followed Jay's story, it remained a testament to the importance of second chances. He now had a part-time job coordinating donations for Hope for Heroes. Using the organizational skills he learned in the military, he streamlined their donation system, making sure that no jacket leather or otherwise would ever be wrongly labeled again. His relationship with Rob Marshall, once solely client attorney, blossomed into a genuine friendship. They regularly met for lunch, discussing everything from Philadelphia Eagles football to the latest legal developments. Rob even accompanied Jay to a Veterans Affairs event, where Jay received a Community Service Award. The plaque read, "For tireless efforts to uplift fellow veterans and unwavering resilience in the face of adversity." It was a small token, but for Jay, it felt like a medal of honor for the new battles he was winning. One day, Jay received a surprising letter from the courthouse. Judge Brewster invited him to speak at a panel discussion for new judges about the challenges veterans face in the legal system. At first, Jay hesitated. Facing a room of legal professionals felt daunting, but Rob encouraged him, reminding him how powerful his voice could be in shaping more empathetic judicial practices. The day of the panel, Jay was visibly nervous, yet when he took the stage, he spoke from the heart, recounting how a lack of understanding of veterans' mental health issues nearly landed him in prison. He shared how critical it was for judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys to consider the entire context of a defendant's life. Judge Brewster, seated nearby, nodded in agreement. "We must see the human being behind the charges," she told the audience. "Mr. Delaney's case is a prime example of why nuanced understanding can lead to true justice." Meanwhile, Linda Kowalski's fortunes took a dark turn. After losing her job, she struggled to find stable employment. Word of her involvement in a perjury-like scandal had spread, and potential employers were wary. Rumors circulated that she might file a lawsuit against Walmart for pressuring her to lie. Some said she made a deal with corporate higher-ups to share incriminating emails in exchange for a severance package. However, nothing concrete surfaced publicly. For Linda, the easy road of lying in court had exacted a steep personal cost. Her short-lived financial gain dissolved into ongoing hardship, a prime example of how dishonesty can boomerang with devastating impact. As for Margaret Valenti, her political career never recovered. The trial's outcome and subsequent revelations of withheld evidence torpedoed her credibility. She attempted to pivot, issuing statements of regret about how the case was handled. But the public, especially the veteran community, found her remorse too little, too late. In the next election, she was handily defeated by a reform-minded candidate who pledged a more balanced approach to prosecution, especially in cases involving mental health and veteran status. Margaret retreated from the public eye. Reports suggested she took a consultant role in a private law firm, far from the glare of cameras and political ambitions. The final blow came when local bar associations questioned her ethics. While she avoided disbarment, her name was tarnished in legal circles. The ambition that had once driven her to aggressively prosecute Jay eventually became her downfall karma in full swing. Jay's life wasn't perfect after the trial. He still had nightmares, still felt a surge of anxiety in crowded places, and sometimes found it hard to trust people. But he woke up each morning with a purpose. He had come dangerously close to losing it all: his freedom, his dignity, his life. Yet he emerged stronger, not just for himself, but for others who struggled in similar ways. Through Hope for Heroes, he launched a small outreach program called Operation Warmth, delivering donated clothing and supplies to homeless veterans around Philadelphia. He believed that if one jacket could cause so much turmoil, perhaps 1,000 more donated jackets could help mend broken lives. Within a few months, Operation Warmth garnered citywide attention, receiving generous donations from local citizens and even corporations like Target. The Walmart fiasco had ironically raised awareness, and in a bid to salvage some public goodwill, Walmart also donated to the cause, although Jay remained cautious about their motives. Nonetheless, he accepted the donation, reasoning that it would benefit the community he cared about. In the end, Jay's story stood as a testament to how adversity can spark transformation. A single moment finding that leather jacket had catapulted him into a legal battle that exposed corruption, tested friendships, and forced a city to confront its prejudices. Jay rediscovered his sense of purpose, serving others, standing up for those without a voice, and reminding society that behind every homeless individual might stand a hero waiting to be recognized. Though the courtroom is empty now and the cameras have long since disappeared, Jay Delaney's story continues to inspire change throughout Philadelphia and beyond. He taught us that one act of compassion, like offering a donated jacket, can ripple outward, sparking second chances. He reminded us that hard-hitting karma eventually finds those who exploit the vulnerable, as happened to those who sought to profit from his misfortune. Most of all, Jay's resilience is a testament that the human spirit can rise above any injustice. If you found hope, inspiration, or even a lesson in this remarkable journey, consider helping those in need, especially the veterans who've sacrificed so much. Like, share, and subscribe to support more stories that uplift and educate. Together, we can spread messages of empathy, justice, and compassion to light the way for others navigating life's darkest trials. Thank you for watching and for caring.